Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. This is the post-game pod from the Timberwolves' third straight win, an exciting win over the Spurs on Sunday. We'll talk about how the Wolves dug themselves a bit of a hole, how the bench helped build them a 16-point lead. They gave it all back, but still won down the stretch, and it wasn't because of Anthony Edwards. Once again, strong bench play. Donte DiVincenzo continues a really impressive hot streak. We'll break the whole game down here on the show. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Happy Monday, everybody. Hopefully you've had a fantastic past week or so of the holiday season and I guess an early Happy New Year as well. The Timberwolves play New Year's Eve this year in OKC. So I guess an early Happy New Year as we head toward that holiday later this week. The Wolves have won 3 straight. Today's the post-game pod from the Timberwolves win over the Spurs on Sunday. A really fun game, really kind of Wemby versus, not Wemby versus Ant, more like Wemby versus the collective Timberwolves. I don't know, the Timberwolves collectively, right? There wasn't, other than we'll get into Donte DiVincenzo's game. There's some pretty interesting stuff to get into on this one. Because he led the team in scoring. Rudy was awesome against his fellow countryman Wemby. And the Wolves had a really good plan defensively too. So we'll talk about kind of the fits and starts of this game, why it was so topsy-turvy, and that's what we'll do on today's show. A big thank you off the top for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show's free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And a reminder, you can subscribe to our daily newsletter at lockedondaily.com. It's one stop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. Sign up for free right now. Again, lockedondaily.com. And start your day with the all-new free Locked On Wolves newsletter. All right, setting this one up. So the Timberwolves are coming off the exciting win over Houston on Friday night, the game winner in the final 25 seconds, and have now had won 2 straight coming into this one, of course, beating Dallas on Christmas Day. A couple of really good teams, Dallas and Houston, and now playing a team that they had lost to earlier in the season, and obviously has one of the league's best young, exciting players in Wemby, and just a solid Spurs team that feels like they're going to be at least a play-in team. And Minnesota was, I think, Fatal had them favored by 6.5, which surprised me a little bit. Besides Rob Dillingham, the Wolves were fully healthy. The Spurs pretty healthy too. So, I was a little surprised that they were favored by that much. And sure enough, it ended up being a really close game. The Timberwolves, once again, this is another one of those stop me if you've heard this before moments. But they again came out really flat with their start. I shouldn't say flat. I don't think they looked flat. It wasn't an energy thing. And of course, back home where the last couple times they've been at home, it was pretty much a debacle with how they performed at home. Target Center crowd booing, getting on Julius Randle, the whole thing. Their last 2 wins had come on the road. The last time they were at home, they lost to the Warriors and Knicks, and that was the first 2 games of what ultimately was a 3-game losing streak. But I thought the energy was good to start. That wasn't the problem. The problem was, once again, just missing shots and a bit of stagnation in terms of the offense. The Wolves spent the early part of the game kind of matchup hunting, and Jack Borman and I talked about this on the postcast that I hosted last night. So if you missed the live postcast on Locked On Sports Minnesota on YouTube, you can find the audio. It's the episode before this in your audio feed. And typically Luke Inman hosts. I hosted this time around with Jack. And Jack talked a bit about how basically the Timberwolves were trying to hunt like Chris Paul was trying to guard Jaden McDaniels. And the Spurs have done this before. Teams that have had Chris Paul, well, not just Chris Paul's done this in the past, but other teams have tried this too, where you put your point guard on Jaden because he's your least, least threatening offensive player. You obviously can't put him on Rudy because then lobs become that much easier. But the idea was we can hide Chris Paul and Jaden. We can put our length elsewhere. Sohan can guard Ant, stuff like that. And the Wolves spent some time trying to hunt that matchup. They were trying to find like, hey, we have this mismatch. Let's go get a bucket because Jaden can score on him. And They were able to get a couple buckets that way, but they also tried so hard that they turned it over a few times. They got some easy buckets in the paint. They had some turnovers. Then they missed some threes. They didn't really do a great job actually getting all the way to the rim. And actually, Ant didn't even shoot the ball until the 5-minute mark in the first quarter. And in some ways, it's a credit to the Wolves trying to find those mismatches, trying to move the basketball and get open shots. But they also just weren't scoring. And at some point, you just need Ant to take over. And the first quarter was a struggle offensively for Minnesota because Ant wasn't involved, because they didn't consistently find those matchups that they could attack. And then on the other end of the floor, the Spurs were just crashing the glass. They got offensive rebounds that got them, I think they had at least 5 second chance points in the first half of the first quarter. And the Spurs were able to build a little bit of a lead. In fact, it was a 10-point lead. The Wolves got their reserves in the game a little bit later than they typically do. So the starters dug a double-digit hole for the bench to dig out of. And sure enough, the bench did dig out of it. They did a lot of that work already in the first quarter. It was a bench unit of the bench trio that we always talk about, Nickeil and Donte DiVincenzo and Naz Reid. And this time, plus Josh Minott, who we'll talk more about on tomorrow's show, who played really well against Houston on Friday. And I've also been, if you've been listening, I've been talking a lot about Josh Minott lately because I think he's going to be a key part of where this team ultimately gets this year. But Josh was part of that lineup, and then Julius Randle's in the game as well. And they actually pushed the pace a little bit more, which is something we've talked about quite a bit on the show, that, believe it or not, Anthony Edwards a lot of times is the culprit when it comes to slowing down the Wolves in transition. And as I've said many times before, I don't think the Wolves should be a top 10 team in pace. I don't. However, they need to be more opportunistic when it comes to chances to push the pace against certain teams in certain matchups with certain lineups on the floor. And I don't mean to say that like they need to, I don't want to make this like a checklist that they have to literally think about every time they get a rebound, but they should just know, like, hey, okay, we need to run on the Spurs because it's hard to score on Wemby in the half court. It just is. We're also not making threes. And we've got this lineup with Randle and Donte and Naz on the floor, and Nickeil. These are all guys that can push the pace. Julius Randle's at his best when he's got the ball in his hands in the open floor in the secondary break, can attack a mismatch, can attack somebody who's on their heels, and just go to work instead of, all right, 16 seconds on the shot clock, have him back down until it gets to about 8 seconds, and then shoot a really tough kind of fadeaway or throw start a rotation on the perimeter, which gives somebody a hand grenade with the whole thing unfolds so slowly that the defense has time to recover. This is Randle at his best. And Donte DiVincenzo is much better as a trail catch and shoot 3-point shooter, or sprint to the corner 3-point shooter, or even attacking the rim in transition. He did a lot of that with the Knicks last year. Remember, he wasn't just a 3-point shooter. He was a phenomenal 3-point shooter with the Knicks. But that's not the only thing he did. He also scored in the half court. He also scored in transition at the rim. And he's a talented offensive player. So to get those two going in the open court with 3 more guys who love to run, Naz, Josh Minott, and Nickeil Alexander-Walker, that's a lineup where everyone can shoot the 3. And, Minott is the jury's still out on if he's a rotation, league average or above 3-point shooter getting rotation minutes, but he seems to be capable enough as a 3-point shooter. Randle's a league average 3-point shooter, but teams have to respect it. And Nickeil, DiVincenzo, and Reid all are better than league average. I know what their numbers are this year, which, by the way, are improving, but they're all potent catch and shoot guys. So to push in transition, and they can all score at the rim, right? The athleticism, we know what Randle can do. We know Naz can get to the rim quickly. Nickeil's comfortable doing it. Donte is too, and Josh Minott's super athletic. That lineup is quickly becoming one of my favorite lineups for the Wolves because it can do so many things, but it can push the pace and score both at the rim and outside the arc and play make for each other. Those are all guys who could pass the ball too, and all guys who could put it on the floor. It's a really kind of a weird, a little bit undersized, yet still big. Think about it. Randle and Reid are both undersized to play the 5. And obviously Reid is the nominal 5 in that situation. Minott's pretty big to be playing the 3. So you basically got 3 guys between Minott, Randle, and Reid who are between 6'8" and 6'10". And, none of them are like point forwards, but they can all handle it a little bit. Minott would be the one that I'd worry about passing the ball, but the other 2 guys can pass it. And then you have two guys, neither of them who are actually point guards, Nikhil Alexander-Walker and Donte DiVincenzo, but both masquerade as point guards at times and are being asked to do it quite a bit this year. That's a really weird lineup, just from a 1-5 basketball perspective. But it works because they play how the Wolves need to play as a team, which is opportunistic, push the pace, using athleticism and outside shooting. And, they also could play, dribble handoff game was really strong with DiVincenzo. It's something he did great in New York. And, rather than him running the traditional offense, just go into dribble handoff with Donte. He can pull from 3, he can pull from 30 feet and knock it down, or he can, throw a pocket pass, which we saw him do as well. A really fun unit that did really well for the Wolves in this game. And they went on a quick run to start the second quarter. I think it was a 10-0 run. Ultimately, they scored 32 points in the quarter and hold the Spurs to 12. In fact, San Antonio was stuck at 9 points in the second quarter until they were stuck at 7 points until 3 minutes left in the frame. And then finally at the end of the second quarter, Ant got involved a little bit. I want to talk more about what happened late in the game down the stretch, and then we'll get to individual studs and duds. We'll talk about Ant's performance as well. We also have to talk Rudy. He was great. A lot to get to still. We'll get to all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at Rocket RX. Today's episode is brought to you by Rocket RX. If you're ready to boost your confidence and take control in the bedroom, Rocket RX has the solution. Imagine feeling more prepared and performing at your best. Rocket RX makes it simple and stress-free. Rocket RX offers FDA-approved treatments for erectile dysfunction at a lower cost than branded alternatives. No more uncomfortable doctor visits or pharmacy trips. Everything is delivered straight to your door in discreet, plain packaging. With Rocket RX, you'll get trusted care from a real U.S. clinical team. Complete a quick 100% online consultation, then you can get your free prescription today. Visit rocketrx.com to get started now. It only takes 2 minutes. Right now, our listeners can get 40% off your first order when you use the code LOCKEDONNBA. That's rocketrx.com, code LOCKEDONNBA for 40% off your first order. Terms and conditions apply. Rocket RX, better sex made simple. All right. So the Timberwolves use a big second quarter, and that bench unit again. We'll talk a lot more lineups tomorrow. I don't want to go too far down that path today. We've got a show tomorrow to do that. We'll also preview the Thunder matchup tomorrow. But the lineup, the bench lineup, and then obviously that hybrid lineup as the starters start to come back into the game midway through the second quarter. That's what builds this lead. They win the second quarter 32-12 after being down 8 at the end of the first quarter. Now they're up 12 at halftime, and the offense is humming a bit. Anthony Edwards got involved toward the end of the second quarter, hits a couple threes. They start running more spread pick and roll with Rudy Gobert. And then Rudy is awesome in the second quarter and continues that into the second half. Rudy really locked down Wemby early in the game. I talked about cross-matching early, but the Wolves had Gobert guarding Sohan, which by that, I mean, in air quotes, guarding. It's like what they've done in the past against other teams where, he just roams off of the least threatening offensive player. It's like last year against the Thunder when Josh Giddey was on OKC. The Wolves weren't the only team to do this, but Rudy Gobert is the most frightening free safety in the league this side of Wemby. And so that's what they did is he sagged off of Sohan. Wemby was like, I'm just going to shoot jumpers. I don't want to attack the paint, which is crazy because the dude's massive, like that much, so much bigger than Rudy Gobert. And he didn't want to contest him. Then he ends up trying to do that in the second quarter and Rudy shuts him down. Rudy blocked him at one point. Like lots of contests, some never minds from Rudy where guys were like, nah, I'm not doing this. A really impressive second quarter from Rudy kind of helped put the cap on that run, and then Ant got a little bit of offense going. So again, they're up 12 at halftime. Third quarter, the starting unit kind of pushes that lead a little bit higher, and then they give a ton of it back. And they miss a ton of wide open threes. Like I'm talking 7, 8, 9, just wide open threes that they miss. Still, doing enough in terms of forcing turnovers and, activity level good enough to, again, build that lead up to 16. But then all of a sudden it's Wemby who can't miss. And Devin Vassell, who's killed the Wolves in the past, it is a really nice player, has an awesome third quarter as well. The Spurs win the third by 12, which makes this a tie ball game going to the fourth quarter. And the Wolves start the fourth tough with Wemby off the floor. The Wolves actually lost the non-Wemby minutes. And then Wemby checks in. The Spurs go on a run. I think the Wolves got down 8 in the fourth quarter. And then Anthony Edwards comes in, and Ant and Randle both get to work. Randle more so than Ant. Like, Randle was just better than Ant in this game. And they were a bit hesitant in the offensive flow, which, again, goes back to some of the stagnation. I talked about this on the postcast. I made this point with Jack last night, was I felt like Ant was indecisive in this game, which is unusual for him. It's almost like he wanted to be more assertive in getting to the paint, and that was hindering his overall game because he was like, and I don't know if it's because Wemby was there that then it gave him hesitation or what, but he would just go too late, and he ended up only shooting 1 of 9 on threes because he was indecisive shooting outside the arc too. And the Wolves also had fouling issues. The Spurs are great at not fouling themselves. The officiating, by the way, in this game, I think I've only said this twice this year, maybe 3 times. The officiating was quite poor. And I don't necessarily think it was lopsided. I know the Wolves shot a lot less free throws. Part of that is just the way these teams play. They did catch up a little late, but like they had a dozen free throws until like midway through the fourth quarter. And still San Antonio attempted 9 more. I don't think it was like intentionally bad or anything like that. It was just bad officiating on both ends. And I think grand scheme of things, the Wolves did get a bit of the short end there, but that was tough. Anyway, the Wolves were down a couple possessions. Jaden gets a big putback slam midway through the fourth quarter. And then Ant gets a big block on the other end. Donte also had a big play in transition to keep Wemby from getting a dunk in what was a 1-possession game at that point. Goes back and forth down the stretch. Don't really want to go completely blow by blow, but basically the Wolves did a really good job. And on the final possession of the game, we didn't actually touch on this on the postcast, but the Wolves up to be able to force the ball out of Wemby's hands, force the ball out of Chris Paul's hands, Randle and McDaniels switching seamlessly on the perimeter, pressing up against each of those guys 30, 35 feet from the basket, and ultimately getting a Jeremy Sohan semi-contested 3-point shot from the slot. That's exactly what you want if you're Minnesota, and the last thing you want if you're San Antonio. I don't know why he didn't swing it to Harrison Barnes in the corner. Donte was trying to play too and did a really good job playing too because he jumped the passing lane where Sohan thought he had to shoot it, and Donte still got a pretty good contest on Sohan's 3-point attempt. That would have won the game for the Spurs. Instead, it clanged off the far side of the backboard, and the Wolves held on to win by 2. But impressive execution down the stretch. I thought Ant was good enough for how poor he was for most of the game down the stretch. Rudy continued to play well. He had a big free throw. He had a pair of free throws. He had been 5 for 5, actually 4 for 4 to that point, and got a big rebound and was fouled. Could have hit 2 to make it a 4-point game, which would have really changed the complexion of the final 30 seconds. But he split the pair, which was huge because it pushed it from 2 to 3. So big free throw from Rudy. Strong play down the stretch defensively from Jaden, from Julius Randle, which I don't think I've said all year. I don't think I've complimented Julius Randle's defense. And it was good in the late, the final minute of this game. Really good execution down the stretch against a solid Spurs team. Like, this is a team with a similar record that, after this game, now the Spurs are at 500. Obviously an ascending Spurs team, a healthy Spurs team, a team that is likely going to be in the play-in this year. And we've needed to see the Wolves execute in crunch time, and they did. Now, disappointing that the starters continue to kind of allow this team to be dragged back down to earth when they should be building a bigger lead. Jack and I talked on the postcast. If they just make their open threes, they probably win this game by 15, 20 plus. It was one of those games where the offense was actually generating these looks. The Spurs perimeter defenders are poor enough that Wemby's obviously formidable, which, by the way, Wemby didn't get his first block until the second half of this game and only had 2 when it was all said and done. But the Wolves had a lot of opportunities to build a bigger lead in this game and just weren't able to do it because they missed so many open threes. Minnesota finished 11 of 44. That's 25% on 3-point attempts. Donte was 5 of 10. So everyone not named Donte DiVincenzo was 6 for 34 in this game. Ant was 1 of 9. Jaden and Julius in the starting lineup combined to go 0 for 11. Conley was 1 for 4. Nas was 1 for 4. Josh Minott was 1 for 2. And then Nikhil was 2 for 4. So Nikhil was the only player besides Donte that attempted a 3 in this game for the Wolves that made more than 1. Really brutal shooting display from Minnesota. Yet they were good enough in the paint, got to the line enough late, and had 18 offensive rebounds. I should also shout out Jack's note that he had. He pointed this out on the postcast and then again on Twitter last night. Rudy had 11 offensive rebounds, 10 of them in the second half. He's the first player with 10 or more offensive rebounds in a game since Ivica Zubac over 2 years ago. And near as we could tell, we couldn't find easily where, the last time somebody had 10 offensive rebounds in a half, 10 of his 11 offensive rebounds came in the second half of this game. And you wouldn't expect it to come against a team with Victor Wembanyama. But again, Rudy's activity was awesome. We'll talk a bit more about that when we get into studs and duds. We'll talk about Ant. We'll talk a little Josh Minott. We'll talk Nas. A lot to get into here in the final segment related to studs and duds. We'll do all that here next. All right, individual studs and duds from this one. I thought that the best overall player on the floor, it wasn't really close for the Wolves, was Donte DiVincenzo. He had 26 points on 8 of 15 shooting, so better than 50% for the floor. He was 3 for 5 on twos. He got to the rack a couple of times, hit a really nice kind of hesitation, almost like it wasn't an up and under, but it was like like he jab stepped one way, lost the defender, got to the rim for a reverse. One of his misses was a dunk that he just blew. Like it was a good performance from Donte. 5 of 10 on threes, 5 of 6 at the line, got the line 6 times, 7 boards. He was 4th on the team in rebounding in this game. Rudy had 15. Jaden had 10. We'll talk about that. Ant had 8. Donte had 7 rebounds. Also 4 assists, only 2 turnovers. This is crazy. Donte DiVincenzo was a plus 23 for the Wolves in this game. They only won by a bucket. Nobody else was better than a plus 6. Well, they only had one starter that was positive. Ant was a plus 2. Otherwise, the bench was all neutral. They were either 0 or positive. And Donte was a plus 23. The next best was Nikhil's plus 6. DiVincenzo was really good. I talked a lot in the first segment about his activity level and assistance in pushing the pace. His catch and shoot threes. This is something else I think we'll do on Tuesday's show. But his catch and shoot number recently has been off the charts. Still struggling a little off the dribble, but he's gone back to taking more attempts of the catch and shoot variety instead of off the dribble, which for anybody is a good thing. I know like Ant's a great off the dribble 3-point shooter. It's always still better to actually, I think for a while at least, Ant was better percentage wise this year catch a dribble off the dribble than he was catch and shoot, which is abnormal. Like for basically any player, it's better. Catch and shoot opportunities are better. They're usually cleaner. The rhythm's better. All the above. And Donte has been taking more catch and shoot recently, less off the dribble. And sure enough, in this game, I think all of his misses but one might have been off the dribble. All that to say, 5 of 10 on threes. The first half, again, from Donte was great, just like it was against Houston. The second quarter, I believe he played the full second quarter again, which he did against the Rockets on Friday. They need to keep Donte going because if this is the Donte DiVincenzo that the Wolves got, I mean, this is who they thought they were getting. And I talked about it in the wake of that trade, how Donte would ultimately be the key because I thought Randle's production would eventually get to the point where it was similar to Cat's and, maybe a little, I still in a vacuum, Cat's a better player. I said it then, I'll say it now. But I thought Ant could take a step up and, level up to pull some of the old Cat offensive production. They could paper over some of it with Nas, and Randle would be good enough, and Randle could provide some ability to punish mismatches. And basically, it was going to swing on Donte. Because if Donte was going to be a starting caliber player off the bench for Minnesota, then the Wolves could still win the trade and be as good or better this year. I thought that was a possibility. I still think it's unlikely sitting here now, 30-plus games into the season. But if Donte plays like this, they have a shot to at this point, it's tough given the number of wins they're at this point in the season, but to still be a 50-plus win team and to still be a, to get hot, to push for a top 4 seed in the West, that's also on the table. And I don't mean to put it all on Donte DiVincenzo's shoulders, but he's a big part of it. And then there's also the Mike Conley piece, which is very related to this. Conley only played 23 minutes, again, struggled, was 1 of 5 shooting. And he's the only guy on the roster that plays that's a true point guard. And that's where the Rob Dillingham conversation comes in. But if they can kind of, again, paper over the issue of not having a true point guard with Donte and Nikhil kind of, and at times Julius Randle and obviously Ant initiating offense, it's certainly dicey at times, as we've seen, but this is a good example of if you push in transition with certain lineups, especially with Rudy off the floor, you can get a lot of that offense back by just making them transition opportunities, by getting threes in the secondary break, trail threes, getting to the free throw line in transition without needing to set up an offense and run something with somebody who's not a true point guard. And Donte's a huge part of that. Anyway, he was great in this game. We'll talk more about this here moving forward. Rudy, also awesome in this game. Talked a lot about him already. He had 10 second half offensive rebounds, which is crazy. The first guy with 10 or more offensive rebounds in a game in over 2 years. 17 points, 15 rebounds overall, 6 of 12 shooting. And, he played a little bit of patty cake there on the offensive glass with himself. It wasn't quite Kevin Love worthy, to Kevin Love's level, but 6 of 12 overall shooting, but he was 5 of 6 at the line, as we talked about. Hit that big free throw to make it a 3-point game in the final minute. He had a couple of blocks, a couple of assists. One of those blocks was on Wemby. He had another big block in this game that started a fast break the other way. And honestly, I think this is the best he's played Wemby. Wemby, yeah, he got 34 points, but it took him 30 shots to do it. The Wolves made Wemby's life difficult, and everything flowed through Victor Wembanyama in this game. Nobody else on the Spurs attempted more than 14 shots. So said another way, Wemby attempted more than twice as many shots as the next most used, if you will, or the next most shot attempts by an individual Spurs player, which is nuts. I mean, that's probably how it should be, because who else is scoring on this team? I guess Devin Vassell probably should have more than 14 shot attempts, but I get it. And again, credit to Rudy and credit to the Wolves for a strong defensive game plan. Have Rudy roaming off of Sohan and, cross match where necessary and just try and make, Wemby hit a couple of impossible shots. He had a long 2 when the Wolves were trying to pull away in the final 4 or 5 minutes of the fourth quarter. That was just crazy. Randle forced him into a really tough shot, and he made it. And that's just credit to Wemby. And I mentioned Randle's defense early in the final possession, but Randle was the primary for Wemby for a lot of this game with Rudy as the roamer. And Randle was solid, really, really solid defensively. It's the same strategy they've deployed against some other bigs, where you use Randle's physicality. He's not going to get called for a foul every time down. And actually, he only got 1 foul called on him in this game. It was Jaden that had 5 fouls, maybe not surprising. Rudy had 4 in this game. Naz had 4 off the bench. But Julius, and I don't think it was for lack of effort. Sometimes it is with Julius Randle and for Ant defensively when those guys aren't picking up fouls. But I actually thought Julius's defense was active in this game. He was in the jersey of Wemby for a good chunk of this one, and I was very impressed with the effort he put forward and his effectiveness defensively in this game too. All right, so Donte, Rudy are my first 2 studs. I guess for my third one, I could go Naz. I could go Julius. I think I'll go Jaden McDaniels. 12 points, 10 rebounds. The second game this season, and also the second in his career, where Jaden McDaniels had 10 rebounds. I think that's true. I know for a fact it's his second career double-double, and they both came this year. And I don't think he'd ever reached double figures in rebounds and also had a single-digit point total in a game. So I'll roll with that. His second career double-double, 12 and 10, 6 of 12 shooting. He did miss 4 threes. They were all open. That's an issue. We talked about that already as a team. Jaden's got to start making threes. He's around 30% now in the season. That can't be where he is. It's got to be better. However, his offensive activity was good in this game. I talked about the tip slam that made it, I think, cut the deficit to maybe 5 or 4 about halfway through the fourth quarter after a big Spurs run. That was a big play. I think it was right after he'd been called for a ticky-tack foul on the other end. He had 5 fouls. Some were ticky-tack, as they are with Jaden. He's got a reputation, the whole thing. But I thought he played through the foul trouble, the foul issues well in this game. He still managed to play 32 minutes. He still managed to get 10 boards, 4 offensive boards. And even though the 3-point shot wasn't he hit those shots against mismatches early in the game, and then he had that tip dunk at the end, and he had one other shot in the paint in the fourth quarter. All of his scoring was early first quarter, late fourth quarter. And even though the 3-point shot wasn't falling, I don't know the last time Jaden got to double-figure scoring and didn't make a 3. Now, that shouldn't be a habit because he needs to make 3s, but that shows how active he was in this game and how aggressive he was, which an aggressive Jaden is a good thing. I don't want a high-usage Jaden. I don't think we'll ever see it. I don't want him to be hunting a shot, but if he has a mismatch or he has a one-on-one, if he attacks a reckless closeout, that is a good Jaden. And that is what we saw mostly in this game. I thought he played well enough to be a stud. So I'm going Donte, Rudy, and Jaden as studs in this game. I don't have any duds. I mean, Conley wasn't great, but he ended up only playing 23 minutes. I don't think he actively hurt them. I know he was a minus in his minutes, but when you look at the grander scheme, it's not because of Mike Conley. It was because of the ball stopping, mostly Ant, a little bit of Randle. It wasn't Conley, right? Getting Conley off the floor was more about then ultimately playing a little bit quicker, playing with pace, also with Ant off the floor. And Ant ended up with a positive plus minus because he ended up back in the game with a lot of those bench guys that were playing the right way. And then Ant is still the culprit of slowing things down a bit. It's one of the reasons why I think individual game plus minus can be misleading, but it can also tell a story. Ant was the only starter in the positives, but he played the worst of anybody this side of Conley. Like Randle, McDaniels, Gobert all had better games than Ant. But plus minus also tells us Donte DiVincenzo was a plus 23. Nobody else is better than a plus 6. And that's exactly right. Donte was great in this game. So it could be misleading, but it can also kind of, when it's that drastic, it shows you just how good DiVincenzo was. But then you dig a bit further and you realize that Ant was on the floor with the starters and was part of the problem. And he was on the floor kind of along for the ride with the bench guys that were playing so great. And that's something else we'll cover later in the week is as we continue to kind of evaluate different lineups that Chris Finch rolls out there and lineup combinations. So that's something we'll cover. We'll talk more Josh Minott. Didn't get to him today as much, but we'll talk about him on Tuesday's show. We'll talk rotations. We'll talk Josh Minott. He was good in this game, saw rotation minutes in both the first and second half, I think for the first time this season. So really, really impressive game, really impressive win all the way around and a fun game for the Wolves. So a lot to get to on tomorrow's show. We'll also set you up for Wolves Thunder on New Year's Eve from OKC. So that'll be a topic on Tuesday too. And then we'll be back, of course, Wednesday on New Year's Day with the post-game pod from Wolves Thunder on Tuesday night. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And you can follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, C-K-E-N. A reminder about the Locked On Wolves daily newsletter. It's one stop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. You can sign up for free right now at LockedOnDaily.com. Again, LockedOnDaily.com. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.